Okay, for yin today, a bolster would be nice. But of course, you can do all these poses without props. So come to your mat, grab your bolster if you have one. And we'll start with child's pose. We'll use the bolster. If you don't have a bolster, then just do your traditional child's pose without a bolster. Looks like this. If you do have a bolster, take the bolster the wide way, bring it right behind the thighs. So it's resting on the calves, which takes a little bit of setup. So you'll be on your hands and knees. You'll bring it all the way up as high as you can up against the calves. Big toes together. Sit the hips back. So you're trying to get the hips on the bolster. If you need to keep your knees high, and the hips aren't quite on the bolster, that's fine. The bolster will help you let the hips sink. But if you can, sit the hips back onto the bolster before you even go forward. So hands on the mat, hips are pressing down on the bolster, tops of the feet are on the mat, and then start to walk the hands forward. Let the forehead come down to the mat. So starting off with child's pose, a little bit different. So you'll feel a difference if you typically do child's pose without any props. Your hips may be up a little bit higher, but what's nice is that feedback that you get from the bolster. It helps you press the hips toward the heels, which is what we want to do in our regular, or not our regular practice, a more active practice. So the bolster is a nice way to get that action happening. It also for yin is nice because it helps you calm in the shape, start to quiet the mind. In all these different places we put the props for support, allow us to experience the pose a little differently. And typically when we do child's pose and we don't have any props that we're using, it's difficult for most of us to get the hips all the way down onto the heels. But maybe now with the bolster, if you do have the hips pressing down into the bolster, you can feel how the rest of the shape changes. Maybe you can elongate the spine a little bit more. Maybe you can sink deeper into the pose. Your belly is soft. It's resting between the thighs, but the outer rib cage is still resting on the thighs. So you want to make sure that your knees aren't so wide that the whole torso can fall between the thighs. And start to lift the head up. You'll come back to hands and knees, grab the bolster, bring it the wide way in front of you so it's on the mat. Your hands will be in front of the bolster, knees behind the bolster. We won't use it just yet. Set yourself up in tabletop and let's do some cat-cow breath. So on the inhale, reach the heart forward, lift the tail. On the exhale, round the spine. Keep going on your own, back and forth. You'll make your way back to a neutral spine. If you have blocks, grab them, bring them on the tallest height underneath the hands. If you don't have blocks, you can do this without blocks. And if you don't have a bolster, same thing. You're just on hands and knees. Step the right foot forward, so up between the hands. If you're using the bolster, you want the bolster to be all the way up against the left thigh. So you might need to adjust it. So that way, when you start to push the hips forward, not as far as you can go, you'll feel that support against the back, the top of the left thigh. So hands on the blocks or hands on the mat. If you don't have blocks, you could even come up on to the fingertips if you want to come up a little bit higher. Another option, if you don't have blocks, is bringing the hands to the front thigh and keeping the chest lifted. So you're in a lunge, back knee is down. Pushing the hips forward makes it a little bit more intense, but this is one of those shapes that does build quite a bit with intensity over time. So try to pace yourself. If you're using blocks, set the blocks off to the side, bring the hands down to the mat. Nothing else changes. Legs are still in the same shape. You might need to sneak the right side of the torso inside the thigh. And with the hands down on the mat, start to tuck the back toes, lift the back knee, step back to downward facing dog. So right leg goes back, and then lift that right leg up high. So it's a three-legged down dog. Come into single pigeon. Bring that right shin forward. If you're using a bolster, the shin lands ahead of the bolster. Scoot the hips back. That left foot goes back, and then lift the chest up tall. You want to make sure the hips are even on the bolster. And if the bolster's not working for whatever reason, you can always put a blanket on top of it or a block underneath that right hip. Start to come forward onto the forearms if you're comfortable with that, and finding a place to rest in your single pigeon. Blocks could be nice if you have them and you're not using it underneath the right hip. You could put it underneath the forehead or the chest. And in yin, we're trying to keep things gentle. So it's not, you don't feel like you have to get that right shin as parallel as possible. You can bring that right foot back so it's closer to the left hip to keep it soft. And then the right knee goes more to the right rather than underneath the chest, if you can. And the support underneath the hips, the bolster, it's keeping you from leaning way over to the right. You want to feel like you're even on both hips. And start to lift the head back up. Come back up onto the hands, lifting the chest up. Tuck the back toes, lift the back knee back to downward facing dog, and then set the knees down to the mat. So you're back to hands and knees. Blocks, if you have them underneath the hands, tallest height. Same thing we did before. So left foot steps forward up between the blocks and the hands. Find a place for the hip. So you can't go too far too soon. Try to back off. Don't go in 100%. Make sure the bolster is all the way up against that right thigh. And as you find a soft place to be, start to settle in, steeping in the pose. You have your hands up on blocks. Set the blocks off to the side. Bring the hands to the mat. lowering the chest just for the last bit of the hold. So these lunges in yin we call dragons. With the chest low like this is our baby dragon. And press down into the hands, tuck the back toes, lift the back knees, step that left foot back, downward facing dog. Lift the left leg up and back like your three-legged down dog, and send that left shin ahead of the bolster if you're using it. Otherwise, you just come into a more traditional single pigeon. But that left foot can come closer to the right foot, or right hip, sorry. You don't need to bring it all the way up toward the forearms. Level off the hips, trying to get both hips even on whatever prop you're using. And then start to fold forward. If you feel comfortable coming down, that certainly puts more weight on the hips. So if you feel like it's making it too intense, then back off. And you might be in a different place with this pose on this side. And we'll start to come out of this. So lifting the head, coming back up onto the hands, tucking the back toes, lifting the back knee, stepping back, downward facing dog. Once you get there, knees come down to the mat right away. You can set the bolster off to the side, bring the feet over to one side, and find a seat on your mat. So legs out in front of you, and then start to shift side to side until you feel even on the sit bones. Toes are up, feet are hip width distance apart. So you'll come forward for caterpillar, seated forward fold. So extend the arms forward. If you can easily reach the feet, great. Feel free to do that. If not, make sure the hands are resting down on either the legs or the mat or even blocks. And if there's anything going on with your lower back, forward fold sometimes can aggravate it. So another alternative is taking a strap, looping it around the sole of the feet, keeping the chest upright, pressing the backs of the legs into the mat, keeping the toes up. So you're pressing out through the big toe mound of the feet, and the pinky toe side of the foot's coming in toward the body. So this will open up the back sides of the legs, which is what we're trying to do with either version of this shape. And both are really effective. If you're folding forward, it's a different opening on the back. And if you are using the strap, try not to grip the strap too tight with the hands. Keep it in the legs. And slowly start to come back up to seated. If you have the strap, you can set that off to the side. Make sure for this next one that your bolster's within reach. You're going to come on down onto your back, but you want to make sure that your bolster's in a place where you can still reach it if you're on your back. So keep the soles of the feet to the mat, rest the head down onto the mat, press into the feet. So you walk the feet in like you're going to do bridge pose. Walk the feet in so the heels are close to the body. Press into the feet, lift the hips up high enough so you can get the bolster underneath the hips. The bolster will go in the wide way. Set the hips down onto the bolster and start to get settled here. So soles of the feet are on the mat. Maybe lift the chest up so you can get the shoulder blades underneath you. And the bolster won't elevate the hips that high. So you won't feel a difference here right now, but you will over time. So hug the right knee in toward the chest. You can either hang on to the top of the shin or hang on to the back of the right thigh if that bothers the knee. Either one works. But you're trying to bring the thigh in toward the chest. So the knee's coming in toward the body, not away from the body. Left foot can stay on the mat, or you could start to slide that left heel forward, keeping the heel on the mat. So the left leg's extended, but the left foot isn't elevated from the mat. It's resting down on the mat. If that is uncomfortable, having the left leg extended, then you slide the Sole of the left foot all the way back onto the mat, bending the knee and staying in that shape. And set the right foot down to the mat. Bring the sole of the left foot to the mat. Hug the left knee in toward the chest, either top of the shin or back of the left thigh, either way, whichever one your knee prefers. Thighs coming in toward the chest, knees coming in toward the chest. Right foot still on the mat the way we started on the other side, just so you can do things one at a time, slowly layering on, feeling the difference with each layer. Maybe you extend that right leg forward. If it went well on the first side, you can try it here. And if it doesn't work, don't feel like you have to stick with it. Make sure you're not using any muscles in the right leg to keep the leg elevated. That heel is down on the mat if the leg's extended out in front of you. Set the left foot down onto the mat. So you have, if you don't already, extend the right leg out in front of you, left foot's on the mat. So you can feel what this feels like with one leg out. Maybe it feels good to have both legs out. So both legs are extended out in front of you. Hips are elevated with the bolster. Chest is lifted because of the height of the hips. So you can get your shoulder blades underneath you. Arms are just down by the sides, palms facing up. Now you're opening not only the back with a slight back bend, but also the top of the right hips, or sorry, top of the hips, so hip flexor area, which can feel really nice for some of us, especially having the knee in toward the chest. With a couple of shapes today so far. Eyes can be closed. You can treat this like a shavasana. And start to walk the feet in toward the body. So soles of the feet are on the mat. Feel the difference here with the feet in versus the legs out in front of you. Press into the feet, lift the hips up enough so you can slide the block out from underneath you and set the hips back down to the mat. So that's where you'll feel the difference in the elevation of the hips. Start to feel the spine start to settle. It really adjusts and it feels like your hips should be up like that all the time. I love that transition. Roll over to your left side. Use the hands to bring yourself up to seated, and then you'll still stay on the side. So bring the feet back behind you, grab your bolster, bring it the long way in front of you toward the top of the mat. So knees are going to the side. You have the bolster up against the right hip and you're on the right hip, hands on each side of the bolster. So you'll feel a twist here. You could put a blanket between the knees and the legs if you'd like. Otherwise, hands on each side of the bolster, lengthen the chest forward and start to come down onto the bolster. So you'll walk yourself down onto your forearms. Once you get there, look to the right. See if your neck is okay with you resting the left side of the head onto the bolster. If it's too much, skip it. Elbows can widen. And with our twist, that's how we get into the shoulders. So if your shoulders are sensitive, you don't have to flare out the elbows quite as wide. Find something that's comfortable. And if it's too much for the neck, then you just turn the head so that the right side of the head rests on the torso. And you'll start to lift the head back up, walk the hands in, lifting the chest. Best way to transition is bring the right hand over to the left, turn around so you're seated away from the bolster, And then bring the knees over to the left. So both knees over to the left, right hand comes over, and then bring the left hand on the other side of the bolster. So left hips up against the bolster. Now you have the knees on the other side. Start to lengthen the chest forward. So torso gets long. You can come down onto the forearms and the elbows. See what it's like to turn the head to the left. If that feels okay, then maybe you rest the head down onto the bolster if your body's okay with that. Listen to the neck. If it doesn't like it, you still get a twist with the head going the other direction. And start to settle in. Let the body just drape over the bolster. Maybe you get the elbows in line with the shoulders if your shoulders are liking this deep of an opening with your twist. Otherwise, elbows come in a little closer to the body until you feel like you have the level of shoulder opening that you feel okay with today. We'll start to lift the head back up, walk the hands in, lift the chest away from the bolster, and then you'll set the bolster off to the side, coming to seated. So bolster off to the side, legs out in front of you, coming into seated. Then bring the feet over to the left. So you're coming into deer pose. You're trying to find a 90-degree angle with each leg. So right knee's in front of the right hip. Left knee, it's as close to in line as you can get it with the left hip. Maybe the feet come in toward the body. That's an easier way to do the shape. If you feel like there's enough room, you could move the feet away from the body, flexing the feet, and then turn to face forward. So the chest is facing in the same direction as that right knee. And you'll start to feel that the shape start to take place in the hips. So that outer right knee is pressing down and the inner left knee is pressing down. Left hip's going to be a little bit elevated and you may be leaning way over to the right. That's fine if that's happening. You're trying to get more upright. That takes time if it's not automatically there. You can fold forward over the right leg if you like. Try not to lose that left hip. So it's still working down toward the mat. You can use blocks underneath the hands if you want to. And this right leg is is a similar shape to what we had for single pigeon, except now you can get more of a 90-degree angle, probably compared to your single pigeon. And we've changed the shape of the back leg so that we get an internal hip rotation on the left side. And some of us feel internal hip rotations more than others. Sometimes we don't feel as much on that one. And start to walk the hands back in if you lean forward over the right leg, bringing the chest back to upright. Bring the left hand back behind you, bringing the knees up. So you're facing the side of the mat, keeping the knees and the feet wide. Move the knees side to side like windshield wipers. Ooh, excuse me. Ooh, excuse me. Next time the knees end up all the way over to the left, stay there. Bring the right hand forward. So now you're facing the back of the mat. Same thing here. Make sure the left knee is right in front of the left hip, right knee in line with the right hip. Feet can be in toward the body or starting to move away from the body. If they're all the way out, then the feet are flexed, ankle and knees are in line. Turn to face forward. So you're sitting up tall. You might be leaning over to the left a little bit. That's fine. Chest is facing forward over the left knee. Stay here if this is enough to chew on. If you feel like walking the chest forward and folding forward, that's also an option. Listen to your body. Only you know what you're feeling. So and truthfully, that this is where we build our intuition, how we figure out what our bodies need, how to nourish them. So we take good care of that, take good care of our bodies. And start to walk the hands in if you're leaning forward, bringing the chest upright. Bring the right hand back behind you, bring the knees up, come back to those windshield wipers going side to side. Now feeling the mobility in the hips since we've done both sides with our deer pose. And a bunch of hip opening up leading up until this point. Next time the knees are going over to the right, stay there. Come to face forward. So sitting forward, legs out in front of you. And you can bring the soles of the feet of the mat to the mat so you have a nice bend in the legs. Grab your bolster, slide the bolster the wide way underneath that peak of the knees. And then you'll probably need to scoot the hips forward a little bit, still keeping the bolster where it is. To come down onto your back, you can either lie flat, or if you have a blanket or something else, you could use that as a pillow underneath the head. And if you're using a pillow underneath the head and you want the curve of the neck to be supported, and whatever you're using to rest, right at the tops of the shoulders. Extend the legs out in front of you. You can let the toes turn out, arms down by the sides. Shift the hips forward so the tail's going forward toward the heels. Lift the chest up to get the shoulder blades underneath you. Close the eyes. Start to settle in to Shavasana, final relaxation pose. Start to wiggle the fingers and the toes. Walk the feet in, soles of the feet to the mat. See if you can move the bolster off to the side so it's out of the way. Reach the right arm up and overhead. So just the right arm. Roll over to your right side. See if you can lie the head in the bicep of the right arm. Left arm just rests down the side of the body. Left hand comes down in front of you so you can press yourself up to an easy cross-legged seat or just a comfortable seat, whatever that looks like. Chest is lifted, hands come together in front of you. Slight bow of the head with gratitude for what your body's able to do today. Honor and acknowledge your heart and your spirit, as well as everyone around you. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Thanks so much. Hope you had a good practice and a great day ahead. See you next time.